ChroNoSo, your good friends, JT, Steve Bennett from the Sportscasters here to close out this iconic episode of ChroNoSo covering WrestleMania VI. I know, Steve, it's a show near and dear to both of our hearts. I know you were there live. We're going to talk about that as we go along. This was really the first pay-per-view when I was became a wrestling fan, kind of toward the end of 89 into early 90. So it's always been one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it holds up really well when you look at the crowd, the excitement, the atmosphere, the commentary, and then the big fight feel of this main event, plus Demolition's title win. There's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah, I think the only thing that hurts it is there's no Intercontinental title match.
Yeah.
Because up to this point, that's one of the biggest moments every year of WrestleMania.
Yeah, agreed. Right. They mentioned that one classic.
And that is one thing I thought they should have done a lot earlier, is have the tournament final maybe at WrestleMania. Just have the Warrior drop the belt well in advance, because nobody cared about that element of it.
Right. They could have just set up off the bat. No one's going to keep the IC belt either way. So we'll vacate it and do that. I mean, I guess for intents and purposes, if you look at the card, Beefcake Perfect is kind of your de facto IC, I guess, and that ends up being okay. But yeah, I mean, again, you've heard it all here throughout the night. Everyone's covered it in great detail. So we'll dive into the main event, the Ultimate Challenge. Obviously, we're going to watch it live. There's a reason for that. We'll get to in a second. But on the screen, you're not going to see it for obvious reasons. So there'll be some logos there or whatever. You'll see me and Steve in the corner, but we're going to fire it up. I kind of brought us in here with Hogan's entrance. But so, Steve, you were here live.
Yeah.
And word on the street is you have not watched this match again since April 1st, 1990 at the Skydome.
No, I never watched it back. Now, I've seen, a clip here or there, stuff in the promo packages or whatever, but I've never watched it beginning to beginning. It's kind of like if there was video of the last 30 minutes of my Nana's life, who also passed when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't watch that, if you know what I mean. Like, this is just not a fond childhood memory.
Right.
The night in general is, but these 30 minutes are not.
Were you pretty far up here?
Oh, my God. I have talked about this before. We had the worst seats in the history of an event. We're on the opposite side of that screen. We were all the way away from that and all the way up. I mean, we were probably closer to the top of the CN Tower in Toronto than we were the ring.
It's crazy. I mean, it's such a massive building, and at the time was pretty cutting edge, right? Because it had just opened, a year or two before?
Yeah, that's part of it. I think it just opened. I don't think they didn't have the configuration down to accommodate everyone yet. Like, they were still going through the learning curves.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely leads to an amazing atmosphere, if nothing else, which is what I always love about
it. And it was a massive crowd. I don't think this is one that's disputed, right? I mean,
I've never seen an argument on it. I mean, I think it's a legit 65,000 plus or whatever in there. So you can believe it when you look at it. I mean, everyone's jammed in. And the build for this, of course, is been documented on this podcast series, but it's wonderfully done. I mean, Warrior was really well protected in rocket ship 089. Has a feud with Rude that helps legitimize him, I think, a bit in ring. And then I thought they did a good job with him and Hogan leading up to this. Like, they touch a little bit, but not a lot. But it wasn't to the point where, like, they didn't put their hands on each other at all. So you get like a taste of it, like at the Rumble and when they would do these shoving matches on Saturday's main event. But they also never went to the fact where they had like a tag match or anything like that. Like, this is their first bell-to-bell competition. So I thought they did a really good job protecting this. And you and I, have kind of talked about this on a previous podcast. Like, to me, this is that legacy of the dream match of the gods, right? At WrestleMania, like Hogan Andre, Hogan Warrior, Hogan Rock. We've kind of talked about it. I think maybe one of the drafts we did or something. And
I think we've seen right in the beginning there, they sort of replay the beginning of Hogan Andre.
Yeah.
With them standing there, staring each other down, the pushes. It's almost basically almost a signal, like a recall. Like, look, it's this again, but with these two guys now.
Yeah. Yeah, the next evolution. Whereas that felt like Hogan had to conquer Andre to finally be the guy. Like, he was already the guy, but it felt like you had to get by Andre to like become the king of the mountain. Whereas here now it feels like Warrior is in the Hogan position. Like, he's trying to conquer now the giant of the WWF. Like, you have to beat Hogan to be anyone. I will say, like, I wasn't fully dialed in as a fan just yet until after this show. Was there, I mean, I know you were only like 9 or 10, but like, did it feel to you like there was a chance Hogan was going to win, like beyond just you being a Hogan mark? Or did Warrior feel like, oh, this is like a torch passing no matter what? Or did it feel like another Hogan slays the monster and moves on?
Yeah, it really felt like, I think Hogan was really good at creating doubt in his promos leading up to this. His promos are very different leading up to this match than they were Andre. He always would, in Andre, all the promos were Hulkamania is going to prove that it's the ultimate force and we're going to beat this unbeatable giant. These promos had more of a tone of, and Dave and I have talked about how we don't like this, more of a tone of, this could be our match.
Right.
We could be beaten here. We may be going up against something we haven't gone before, you know, and I think that created doubt, certainly in my mind. You know, I remember thinking, like, why is Hulk talking about like this,
right,
about this guy? This guy's an idiot. You know, he's not.
And I mean, when you factor in the bill and how this goes, like, you could have looked at it, like, I know a couple years later, almost with Sid, they redo it where it could have been it for Hogan. Like, he lays down here and goes off in the sunset to do movies. Like, there may have been a small part of him, like if Suburban Commando, which he was going to film after this, was like any kind of hit, you know, like, could it have been?
Yeah. Jesse plays up to that a little bit too, I feel like, as we go on in this match.
Yeah, that this could be all. And yeah, we do get the big test of strength here with Hogan and Warrior. I mean, this is, you know, they set it up in the intro too, right? The constellations align, and, you know, like it's really meant to be like just two supernatural powers like going to war with each other that are just not normal men. Because even Warrior's promos, he says the same thing. Is like, you're talking about Hogan puts down, I think Warrior does too. Like, they both do a good job of putting each other on a level above everybody else, right? Like, Warrior says the same thing. He's like, only you can meet me here, basically, on this plane of existence, right? Like, nobody else could even do what we're about to do. Like, this is two guys that are at another level beyond everybody else.
I wanted to talk about the crowd. Now, obviously, this is in Toronto, which will prove for decades to be an incredible market for Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
It was at least 90-10 Hulk in terms of support. Maybe the Warrior picked up a little support as the night went on, but it was, I mean, just look at that. I mean, all you see is yellow foam fingers.
Well, and there's so much more history of, I mean, Hogan didn't turn heel, right? So, like, there's so much more baked in history of Hogan fandom than Warrior at this point. Like, Warrior's a supernova, right? He really just lit up over the last year. Hogan's been the man for 7 years. So, I mean, he's going to have the embedded fan base. It was a risk. Like, as much of a pro that you get with Warrior beating Hogan directly to become the man, you also walked into this with a shitload of risk that the crowd was going to be so split or pro Hogan that it kills Warrior, you know, vibe in the match where you're trying to anoint him as the guy. Whereas if he would have beaten like a Savage, you know, Macho King for the title, if, you know, Macho beats Hogan at main event or whatever, and then Warrior beats him, something like that, where you are, and that's kind of been more of their vibe that they do even in the future, right? Diesel doesn't beat Bret Hart, right? He beats Bob Backlund, right? So like they you know, right back all the way back to Bruno, right?
Bruno transition champion. Even like Hulk didn't beat Backlund, right? They put it on.
Exactly. You know, they always do that transitional, quick heel in between. So this was like a new thing for them to really roll out there. So there was a lot of risk. I mean, there was a chance that
they did have a little safety in that Hulk wasn't going to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't have Hulk right away, kind of.
Although he kind of usurps some of the sympathy because Earthquake destroys them like the next week. Right. And they do spend a lot of time on TV with the Get Well Hogan and all that shit.
Oh, yeah. So I wrote my letters.
Oh, no doubt.
Did you write your letters?
Yeah, I probably did. I'm sure I did because I remember, I mean, I definitely was, I think, crying during that video they did. With
Bulldog, when Matilda got kidnapped.
That was creepy.
I was writing some letters then. I remember too, they had a similar thing. So but in the lunchroom too at school, I mean, there was a Warrior fan or two, but for the most part, still very, very pro Hulk. So I think I agree with you that this was a risk.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, for the Hogan doesn't do jobs crowd too. I mean, we'll get to it, but
yeah,
I mean, this is about as clean of a job as you can do.
Oh yeah. I mean, his first really, I think since becoming Hogan, you know, Hogan in '84, this, this is a key point in the match where he falls out of the ring. He's holding his knee. Gorilla and Jesse are talking about his knee's gone. My knee's gone. And that does help set up the finish. I'm not going to call it protecting him. I think it's part of the story.
Right.
And I think it's a good part of the story because you don't often see that level of like body part attack on Hogan. I feel like in all his big matches, it's always just like maybe his back. He tries to slam a fat guy and he hurts his back. Like I feel like you don't see like his leg get worked a lot. Eventually Flair would do it, but before this, so Warrior and Warrior's not like a body part attack guy either. So like the setup of this match is interesting, where Hogan's kind of already a bit of the face in peril with Warrior targeting the leg is kind of like a heelish approach for Warrior.
Right, and Warrior's been healing up with the ref already a little bit too. He's put his hands on him a few different times, pushed him off, pushed him away. So I think they were pushing that a little bit. Funny thing about my dad and my dad's role in all this. So we have talked about famously, certainly on your show, about how I was at the Steamboat Honky Tonk Man and how that match had basically ruined the night. And I pretty much cried the whole night. And then he had gotten me back. And then Killer Khan spit green shit in Hogan's eyes. And then that was really it. But my dad was telling me a story, I don't know, a couple of years ago when I first started talking about these matches and stuff on here. And he's like, yeah, I remember watching this. And when Hogan, when I kind of start to get the vibe that Hogan was going to lose. And I was just like, oh, fuck. Like, what? Like, not again. He's like, because we didn't have a ton of money back then. And it's not like these tickets, they're not even close to WrestleMania now. I think they were like, our tickets, I think $15 each or something.
Right.
But he's like, we put our money together. We took you to this. We're trying to have this unbelievable experience.
You're miserable every time.
Yep. And he's like, I knew by 2/3 into the match that you're going to be crying the whole way home. It's going to be a disaster.
At least this was at the end of the show, unlike the Steamboat one, which,
And it was a lot of fun all night. Like that demolition moment was unbelievable.
It's one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah. Like it was a really fun night. It was.
And now we've kind of flipped a little bit where Hogan's kind of taken the heel control of the match. I think they used Jesse a little bit too to help like Django up some support for Warrior by having him be pro Hogan in this match, which he never is. I mean, so for him to be so anti-Warrior, I think it was their way of trying to get the fans behind Warrior. Like, oh God, if Jesse hates him this much, Warrior must be good. Like Hogan, if he's rooting for Hogan, something's up, right? So
I'm sure you've watched it over the years, but on Superstars leading up to this, they did a cool thing where he basically switched alliances every week.
Yeah,
so one week he would have the Warrior gear on and be pro Warrior. Then the next week he'd have Hogan gear on, and McMahon was just so couldn't believe it. Like, Jesse, you had the Warrior stuff last week, and Jesse like, I changed my mind, and
back and forth.
Jesse was so invaluable in this era.
Oh yeah.
Sadly, this is his last Mania, but
there's less pay-per-view because he's gone right before SummerSlam.
Right. Just a master class by him.
It feels like the end of an era show in many ways. Like, Hogan really passes the torch. Jesse's gone. Demolition's pretty much done for all intents and purposes. Like as we know them after this, even just like acts like perfect, right? He kind of goes to a different spot in his career after this. DiBiase kind of changes a little bit. The Powers of Pain are broken up. Like, that 87 to 89 era after the purge of late 87. So that like 88,
post Mania 3.
Yeah. Or even after that. I'd say post Survivor Series 87.
Okay.
To here is like kind of an era that fades a little bit. Because after Survivor Series 87 is kind of where like the hearts turn after that. Demolition becomes a thing after that. Patera is gone. Morocco's gone. Gang is gone. Like all those guys from like the 85 to 87 run. Piper's gone. So like a lot of those, there's a lot of change in 88.
Sure.
And it happens again, I think, after this show. Bobby pretty much, is almost done managing by the time like we're done with 90. So this is a lot of change in the air for sure around this time. And this match is obviously a big part of it. Do you think, and I know, put aside your homerdom on this question.
Yeah.
Would they have been better suited for Hogan to retain and Warrior to snap and turn heel instead of doing Hogan Quake, have Warrior injure Hogan, and then they fight at SummerSlam in a rematch with Warrior as the heel?
Well, maybe because we know his title run doesn't really go very well.
Right.
You know what I mean? They don't really have any great heels on deck for him. Who they redo Rude,
Yeah, and doesn't work.
They just don't have anything ready for him. So I think, yeah, maybe, maybe that could have been really good. Maybe, maybe Hulk, maybe you smile. I mean, it's a different era too, because you don't have Raw the next night.
No, you needed to clean finish here.
You know what I mean? You had to have a clean finish here. So
I think it would be like Warrior doesn't shake his hand.
Snap
and then
after
on
the fact.
Superstars, he attacks him. Just like Earthquake. You kind of replicate the Earthquake thing. And yeah, I mean, I think Quake was the only guy, but they had him set for Hogan. But he's the only guy that Warrior, I think, could have had a legitimate run with that summer. Because even if you look at the roster, there's not anything you can like. This is the tough thing with this Gods match, right? And this is what I was saying is that maybe they would have been better just using Savage as the in between.
Sure.
Because once you have this, like how does Mr. Perfect feel like a real challenger for Warrior? Like it's not going to happen. You need someone bigger than him,
right? And they just had this problem with Hogan after Andre too, where all you could really do with Hogan was more Andre.
But then they were lucky because the Mega Powers kind of fell in their lap, and it was such an engrossing storyline,
right?
That it didn't matter. Yep. But then even then, they had to use the Twin Towers, and to have like bigger guys. So I think Warrior, like Perfect, Rude, even DiBiase, they don't feel like threats to Warrior. I think Quake was the only guy that was like big enough to feel, and they had some history. I mean, Earthquake debuted right because he attacked Warrior in the push-up contest. So I don't know. Like it felt like they could have used Quake. Quake could have injured Hogan, fought Warrior at SummerSlam, and then Hogan gets and then Hogan comes back and gets his revenge on Quake at Mania.
Sure.
In a world where Warrior's title reign continues,
Right. Yeah, they were really in a tough spot, and I think Pritchard has said that they knew when they got in the limo after on the way back to the airport that they were kind of in trouble.
Yeah.
That they had made a mistake, And
look,
even
if Hogan retains, I guess him and Quake, right? That's
yeah. Or you said, or a Psycho Warrior, maybe.
Right, Warrior turns. The only guy, like I'm even trying to think of who. I mean, like Barbarian, like him and Warlord aren't ready for like a title run. I know they're big enough, like so maybe you have Barbarian step up with Bobby to continue like the Heenan family Warrior thing,
right?
I mean, do you make a play for Luger? Like try and get him in to fight Warrior?
I was going to say, I think maybe we're focusing too much on the roster. Maybe the play would have been to bring someone in from outside.
But even then, I'm trying to think of who WCW had that was like Flair wasn't going to step toe to toe with Warrior,
Warrior just totally missed a clothesline. Did you see that? 2 clotheslines ago.
I mean, we haven't talked too much about the match, but it's a great battle. I mean, the legend is the legend, right? They rehearse the shit out of it.
Yeah, which I'm fine with. Whatever.
Yeah, it shows. I mean, it's near flawless. Like I know he missed that clothesline, but like I feel like Warrior gets a bad rap as a worker, but I don't know if anyone has a better big match hit rate than he does. Like I'm not counting his end of days in WCW, but like if you look at his prime run from 88,
he stepped up on these big nights. He did step up on these big nights.
The Root matches, this match, Savage matches. Like I mean, what sucks from him? You know what I mean?
I don't know if the SummerSlam Rude match is that good. The Mania one is pretty good.
The SummerSlam 89 is great.
You like that in the cage one?
No, the year before, 89.
Oh, the year before. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great one. No, the cage is fine. They don't give much time. It's like 9 minutes. I mean, they're set up to fail. I don't think that's him or Rude's fault.
That's fair. Yeah. No, he's a big match guy. That's just what he was,
Plus, they did this stupid thing on Saturday's Main Event in July where Warrior beats Rude. They fight and he beats him by count out, however the hell he does, or DQ. And it's like,
if Warrior was a starting pitcher, he'd be like 12-13 with a 4 ERA every year, and then when they got to the playoffs, he'd be
lights out.
4-0 with a 1.11. That's just how his career was for whatever reason. Then you have people the opposite of that. Like Jake has miserable pay-per-view matches. DiBiase as well,
very shaky. Even Mr. Perfect, low key, he pulls some out later at the end with Brett and stuff, but like even he doesn't really have a lot of big pay-per-view matches on his resume.
But at least he has an all-timer. Those other guys, do they have all-timers? Like, no,
I don't. I'd have to look at what DiBiase.
That's off the top of my head, I can't think of an all.
Even Savage, and that's even maybe like 3.5. You know what I mean? Like that's not.
Jake's best pay-per-view stuff is the WrestleMania 7, which is a gimmick match, but it's good for what it is. And then that Honky Tonk match at 3 is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's just so overlooked because it's pretty much sandwich right between Steamboat and Hogan.
Right. But if that's your best match, then it's
Yeah,
not a very good. Not a good resume. Him and Savage is fun at like Tuesday in Texas, but even that's more of like a story than a match.
Sure.
Yeah, no, he doesn't have a good track record. But Warrior, Warrior delivered in all the spots. Even at the end, like the SummerSlam match with Savage at the end, 92 was like really, really good.
Yeah. That is pretty good.
So this, to me, if you think Hogan may retain, this is the stretch where you think it could happen, right? He survives the bear hug, and then he's going to Hulk up. You think, okay, here we go. Like, he survives the test.
I was interested. I was thinking about this last night. I was like, how long does that bear hug feel?
It's a while. He's in it.
I remember thinking in the moment, and I think I've said this to people over the years, which helps me remember, that he had him in a bear hug for like 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's a while. I mean, I'm guessing they're using it to gas up for the finish.
Right. Yeah.
Refuel a little bit until pit stop.
Yeah. Neither of these guys are exactly endurance workers in general.
No, but they definitely pull. I mean, the one thing you can say about them in this match is, and just like Hogan Andre, they sold a massive crowd and a show based around one match.
Yep.
And the match delivered. I mean, you can't ask for too much more,
Oh, boy.
There's the ref bump.
I immediately turned to my dad right then and said, you got to be kidding me.
Well, this is a spot where they also could have had like Quake come out or something.
I just knew it was trouble.
Yeah.
It's just trouble.
Well, you knew they had to give Hogan some kind of visual
win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual. I mean, Savage got one in WrestleMania against Steamboat. That's what they did then.
Yeah, always. The ref will go down. You get the guy over with the visual pin, and I mean, it seems like they set Warrior up for it, like that he was going to have Hogan beat, and then
kind of,
and then Hogan retaining, and Warrior has his bitch.
Oh boy,
that was close to landing on Hebner. That
Warrior was having trouble getting out of Hebner's way there.
Do you think there's any truth to the rumor that Hogan Zeus was the original plan for this show?
It might have been, but you only had to see him once to know that wasn't going to work. They might have been like, when they're making that movie, he might have had, dollar signs in his eyes. We're going to run this right to WrestleMania. And then they seen him in the ring once and they're like, yeah, got to reboot.
Because there's an argument, it would have been better for business to have Savage win the belt with Zeus's help. And Warrior beats him here, and Hogan beats Zeus to eradicate him. That's your double main event. And then you do Warrior Hogan with Warrior as champion.
Yeah. I like that.
At Mania 7 or at SummerSlam, whatever.
I just don't know that they could have sucked that much out of Zeus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would have been hard to get him there.
That's another thing where Pritchard said he just wouldn't follow any directions. Like they couldn't teach him anything.
You would have had to have like him at Hogan as like the last two in the Rumble or something like that. So Warrior actually kind of gets the visual fall, not Hogan as much here. So,
and now right here, this I remember too. I remember saying to my dad, "Okay, he's good. He got through it." Because I really thought that was going to be.
If you look at that moment, it's a good swerve because you look at that moment, based on typical WWF booking.
I thought he's good now. He's gonna get the win now.
Like that's it. Like Warrior, the ref is out. Warrior has him beat. Hogan hulks up and finishes him off. I mean, I guess one minor complaint you could say is that he's not really selling the knee anymore, and it does play into the finish. But
right. Although he's hulked up right now, that would be the counter argument. He's hulked up.
Yeah, he's not feeling it.
He's just fighting through it. He's got the adrenaline. The adrenaline is, helping him with the pain right now.
I wonder if this is like one of the few big WWF matches in history that's real minimal outside the ring. Like,
there's not much.
This is it. Like Hogan fell out of the ring on his knee, and then this post. But like other than that, they don't go out of the ring much at all.
Yeah, good point. I hadn't really thought of that.
No, I never really tracked. Like how many matches spend a lot of time out in and out of the ring. Yeah, Warrior. I mean, they're both gassed. Like that clothesline was.
And the things that stick out in my head going into watching this was, how long was the bear hug going to be? Mm-hmm. I remember the ref bump, and I remember how it ends. Them being out of the ring isn't part of my memory at all, you know. So
it was brief. That was it.
Yeah.
That 2 seconds. Besides Hogan falling on his knee, and now you think this for sure is it.
Yep.
And so when this happens, you really think Hogan's got it.
That kid, they just showed a kid in the crowd with a Hulk shirt on with his hand in his. That was me in the upper deck.
I mean, yeah, this right here, you're thinking it's done, right? Like he's hulking up.
This kid, if you're watching this, there's a kid on the camera side. He's got like a Hulk basketball jersey with a red shirt underneath, and his reactions are mine in the upper deck. He was just so pumped when Hulk kicked out.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like.
You see this guy, Justin?
Yeah. He's loving it. He's about to be destroyed though in a minute.
Oh yeah. I never had a good night in this building, by the way. I went to a World Series game a couple years later here, and the Braves lost in a walk-off in the 9th. I don't think I've ever left the Skydome happy.
Don't go back.
Yeah, I think I've been to a couple baseball games since. That's it.
I mean, this is it, right?
This is it.
Boom. Now you're oh no.
Yep.
The finish is good. Like he hits it quick.
Yeah. Almost like he caught Hulk. You know,
and I don't mind the quick pick out because it was like, you know, if you're gonna beat Hogan, you gotta like find that seam and that fuck up, you know, like
he caught him.
Yeah. Now this I think is like this would be more my complaint than the quick kick out, like Hogan center stage pointing at the sky. Like if you have a complaint about him eating up the scenery, like that'd be it. But I mean, it's a big.
Also, he just lost the title. I mean,
yeah, it's a big deal. He's going to
be upset about it, right? I don't know.
And they are focusing a lot on Warrior here.
That was a flat reaction. That's flatter than I remember it, to be honest.
It was, yeah.
I thought he got a little bit bigger cheer than he did. Maybe I was just around more people that liked him in my section.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is what it is. But you really watch it back and think, like,
it's a little shorter than I remember.
Yeah, I think it's about 20 minutes or so,
20
maybe.
minutes, yeah.
I think it's a real case if he made Hogan should have retained, and then Warrior wins it later. Like, I don't know how much you helped him in the end. I know beating Hogan clean and direct is a massive check mark. It's like Hogan beating Andre. No one ever beat Andre. Hogan beat him, right?
Right.
But Andre was a heel dick. Like, I do think that risk is there with Warrior. Not only don't you have heels for him, you also don't have
the kid that's me loved it. Nice little clap here. I did not handle it as well.
Yeah, I mean, not only does he not have heels, he's also, going over a beloved guy, and you've already muted his reaction. And this is, yeah.
Hulk gave him the honors there, though. Handed it off pretty clean to him and walks out.
I look back at it, and it's funny because, like, if you want to tie a little bit to modern times, right? They kind of go opposite of Cody Roman, right? Roman wins the first one. This is how WWF worked back then, but it's like, and everyone was pissed at the time, and they blew Cody's moment. But giving Cody that extra year of working toward it ended up meaning so much more. And you almost wonder if Warrior taking the tough loss here and then winning it a year later would have been like a better. But I get why they feel like they had to act now. Like, again, they also catch a lot of shit at times for not acting while the iron's hot, and they did it here. So it's like you also got to give him credit for that. Because what if he loses and he never gets this hot again?
I think it was a miscalculation here, though, in terms of I think Vince thought they needed to do this, that Hulkamania was on the decline. I think he's like 2 years early on that.
Yeah.
I think we're more 92, 93 before that happens. I think they
Warrior makes it there. So then you're going to just admit that he's not the guy. I think the only other way to do this is you have Quake hurt Hogan before the main event and have Savage win the belt in a shock over Hogan.
Look at how, and I wonder too, because going into this, when people would ask me, like, what are you most excited for? I would say Hulk to win and the celebration after.
Right.
The Real American playing, thinking the guy upstairs, like that moment that it ended so many WrestleManias, so many pay-per-views. Look at how many empty seats there are already.
Yeah.
And I would love to see a comparison. Like, did people walk out like this when it was Hogan? Look at all the blue.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. I'm not saying people did or didn't. Maybe they did walk out. But I know personally, I was really disappointed that I didn't like that was what I went for.
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, he was the star of your circus for the last 7 years. Like, it's hard to just assume people are going to be like, okay, we're done with him, on to the next. Like, you spent 7 years or 6 years telling us this is the guy you need to worship, no matter what, in every scenario, even if he's kind of being a dick and stealing his best friend's girl, like whatever it is, like, you know, eliminating his buddies from the Rumble, you know, all that, right?
Yeah, all that definitely happened for sure.
But we're told no matter what the scenario is, this is the guy. And now suddenly overnight, you're like, oh, by the way, it's not the guy, right? So it's it was a risk, but the trade-offs are one thing, right? Either if you don't run Hogan Warrior, you risk not making this feel like a mega event. I mean, look, the poster's iconic, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like that. If it's Warrior Savage with Hogan Zeus or whatever you want, or Hogan Quake, if you want to rocket Quake up, you know, it's not going to feel like a big deal. But you may be better with Warrior. Like, there's a convention that says Quake fucks up Hogan at the Rumble or somewhere. Savage beats Hogan on the main event, ideally with Tyson, not Douglas, if we're in a dream world. Tyson is there for the big moment.
Tyson did win that fight in the 8th round, by the way. Just go back and watch it. He knocked him out in the 8th round. But so if we're in a dream world, they actually make the correct call there, right? Yeah.
So Tyson's with Savage. It's like a shock to the world.
Yep.
Warrior now has to defeat Savage at WrestleMania. He gets crowned in his big moment. You do Hogan Quake like you do SummerSlam with like a fuck finish. Quake lays him out after the match. And then maybe at the end of Mania, he stares down Warrior from the aisle. And now you march toward Warrior Quake at SummerSlam with Warrior being galvanized. He's got Hogan behind him because he's injured. You know, he beat Savage, who's a hated heel. You know, he doesn't beat Hogan. So I think there's a way again, it depends what you care about more. Like, Hogan Warrior is an iconic match.
Sure.
In time.
Well, I think you're making a point, a really small point in a big way, which is fine, but they just didn't have anything ready for him.
Right.
There was no thought to, all right, we're going to give him this massive, massive shot in the arm here.
Yeah.
And then what? It's like a complaint that some people had with Lesnar ending the streak. Like, oh, you're going to let Lesnar end the streak, but he's part-time, or you know,
but they do capitalize on it. Then he murders John Cena 4 months later.
Right. So, which the people were wrong. And, you know, because I watched that, he just squashed him. It was, I remember watching it thinking like, wow, this is unbelievable. I've never seen a main eventer in a main event just get
Lesnar became their biggest star of the decade. So, but this did not. I think Quake is probably the answer. I think if you have Warrior Revenge Hogan, that's what hurts too. Like, he beats Hogan. Hogan gets murdered by this guy, and Warrior's like doesn't like he's not even involved. He doesn't even give a shit. Like, if you're a fan, I'd be like, well, what the fuck? Like, you know, why aren't you going after this guy? So, like, again, like, they could have had Quake take out Hogan, and then Warrior's like, I got this. Like, I'm gonna eliminate this guy because he just took you out, and you can still do Hogan Quake later, but let Warrior take him on, you know, first. It would have been, I think that would have saved that year for him if he would have went to avenge Hogan and take out Earthquake.
All right. So quickly, after the aftermath from the building and whatever. So you have an Italian father, so you could probably relate to this. So we got to Toronto relatively early enough to, you know, we were going to park somewhere. We were going to go eat. We were going to get to the event, whatever. It's like in the middle of the afternoon that it started too. So we were there like pretty much in the morning. And my dad found a spot to park that was like $6 or something. And I'm like, isn't this kind of far? And he's like, well, no, because we're going to eat here and then we're going to go there. And I'm like, Dad, it seems pretty far. And he's like, no, it's great. But he's just being a cheap, you know?
Yeah.
Right. So then it works out the way he says, like, we go stop halfway in between there and the Sky Dome and eat. And there's a lot of people. It's fun. Then we go the rest of the way. Nothing feels long. And then we're there all day. And then the main event's miserable and I'm miserable. And our seat is like, you know, up on Mars. So we stayed until about probably the middle of, probably around when the pay-per-view cut out. We started walking out. And it took us, without exaggerating, 25 minutes to get out of the front door of the Sky Dome, right? Because the hallways are full. The concourses are smaller back then. Still, it's not these massive concourses yet. You know, it was such a far walk. Then we hit the streets of Toronto. Like, we get out the front door. My dad's standing there for a minute looking around. And I'm like, what? He's like, I'm just trying to remember where the car is. I remember thinking, you got to be kidding me. It took us an hour and 25 minutes to get back to our car. I mean, brutal. We were just walking the streets of Toronto. By the time we got back on the thruway, you would have never known there was an event there. Like, we were just, it was the most miserable 2.5 hours of my childhood, I think. And I'll admit, I lived a privileged life if that was the worst of it. Right, but, dude.
Well, I'll say this. For those that were in Philly this year, I can promise you, all these years later, nothing's changed. It doesn't
get any better. Yeah.
It doesn't get any better getting out of the building and finding your car. Anyway, all right. This is a great time, Steve.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone enjoyed this trip through WrestleMania 6. Stay tuned to everything else in North South Connection, especially here in WrestleMania season. We're going to have a lot of cool stuff leading up to this year's show. Subscribe here on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast apps, and ChroNoSo here every 2 to 3 weeks or so, taking you through the history of wrestling. And we're hitting a pretty, some more fun time, right? As we move through 1990. Now that we're finished with WrestleMania 6. So check it out. Check out Sportscasters as well. That's Steve. I'm JT. Thank you. And we'll talk to you later. Ultimate Challenge has been finished.